Welcome back to National Report. Former President Trump's legal team is now asking Judge Juan Merchan to overturn his New York conviction. This after the Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity. Trump's legal team saying, quote, rather than wait for the Supreme Court's guidance, the prosecutors scoffed with hubris at President Trump's immunity motions and insisted on rushing to trial.
And remember, too, they pushed the sentencing on this case as well. Trump's team is also asking Merchan to not only toss the verdict, but also the indictment so the case could not be retried. So Dwayne Cates is a criminal defense attorney. Eric Faddis is a founding partner at Werner Faddis Elite Legal, and Ben Weingartner, he joins us back in studio. He's a Newsmax contributor. Great panel here to talk about this. Let's get to it. Eric, for this, what are the chances here that Judge Merchan is going to toss this conviction given the high profileness of this case?
You know, I think the chances are on the low side. We've seen how Judge Merchan has approached the case, has approached defense arguments and motions. The judge has several options. He could, in theory, consider dismissing it. He could, in theory, consider a new trial with excluding the evidence of official acts, or he could say there's no relief at all. And I think we're hovering around sort of the last two categories.
Yeah, I think you might be right. Just based on what we've seen before, it seems as though Judge Merchan is not the biggest fan of the former president. He said he will rule on the defense's request on September 6th and will sentence Trump on September 18th, adding, quote, if such is still necessary. So, Dwayne, does that give you any hint as to how Merchan's thinking is right now?
Well, I mean, he's left the door open to not having to have a sentencing, that's for sure. And this whole thing's going to come down to whether or not the judge finds structural error. Because if there's structural error, then they have to throw the verdict out. They could retry Donald Trump on this. It depends on what if they used things that he was immune from in the grand jury to indict him, then I think that the whole case has to be tossed. So there's going to be some interesting developments coming.
Yeah, and the Trump team, they are hoping for an appeal here once the sentencing's handed down. That's been pushed now to September. The Manhattan District's office has until July 24th here to respond to this filing, though. They also declined to comment on this. But I want to go to you and Ben on this. I mean, this is the Democrats right now, if you want to look at it that way, where this is the only trial and conviction that they've got before November. So, two-part question here. What do you make of what happened here with this? Will the judge take this into consideration? And two, how do you think the sentencing is going to go in September once we've got through the RNC? Now we're getting closer towards November. What's your take?
Well, to your point, if the lawfare was the equivalent of COVID in this election, it's proven an unmitigated failure for Democrats, and the Supreme Court ruling on immunity certainly may have further been the death knell of those efforts. I think, look, Judge Merchan has never let the merits get in the way of a good prosecution. And that has essentially been the pattern and practice throughout his presiding over this case, as you've documented at length. So the fact that was there evidence that was presented that can't be presented under immunity because it related to official acts? It's going to be fascinating to see how he rules on that question. I wouldn't hold my breath that he rules in a way that's favorable, not only to Donald Trump, but actually the institution of the presidency, because that is what is really at stake here at the end of the day. This goes way beyond Trump to presidents in the future of this country. So I wouldn't hold my breath on whether or not he'll rule accurately, in my view, on the merits. But as for sentencing, it is a huge question. We're talking about several weeks from Election Day at that point, mid-September. There's already going to be early voting in any number of states, and this could have a huge impact on the election potentially. Do I think that he could potentially sentence Donald Trump to Rikers with no Secret Service? Sure, he's shown himself not to be constrained by politics or merits, for that matter, and how he's ruled thus far.
Dwayne, we have to be real quick with this, but I do have one follow-up question because I did follow this case very closely. What's confusing to me is how does the presidential immunity tie into this case? Because the whole case was about him and what happened prior to the election in order to get him elected. So is this because the checks were made or were given during while he was in the White House? Because that was part of the conviction as well. How does the presidential immunity come into play when all of this alleged misconduct happened prior to November?
Well, it comes into play because they introduced a lot of evidence, tweets, and conversations he had while he was president, which were official acts. So the Supreme Court ruling said that he has immunity, but it also says that they can't use his official acts as evidence to convict him of private wrongdoing. So that's where the immunity comes in. It's that they never should have allowed that testimony to come in. I believe it's structural error, which means that the case has to be tossed, but I could be wrong.
Yeah,
Appreciate
I'd even
clarifying.
heard the testimony of Hope Hicks,
Right.
who had worked alongside Donald Trump even after the election, might not be now qualified because of her official capacity.
Right.
Gentlemen, we got to leave it right there. Dwayne Cates, Eric Faddis, Ben Weingarten, thank you so much. Appreciate your insight.